feeling?
Okay, right, yeah.
You know what we're using the technology. You heard of Skype?
Yeah.
All right, we're Skyping you in, Dad.
Okay.
Pretty amazing thing. I'm gonna put Dad over here.
Tell me, what side of this thing are we talking about? In other words, there's the humorous side, there's the gutsy side, there's all kinds of sides. What kind of stuff are you looking for?
What I'm looking for, quite honestly, is for you guys to talk about anything and everything you want to talk about. Let me introduce myself.
Okay.
Hi, how's it going? My name's Les. We spoke yesterday on the phone.
Yeah.
Okay.
Did you play oboe in the band?
Saxophone.
Where'd the Ogwa come from?
That's Robert Huffman. He's here as well.
Oh.
Yeah. So like I said, I just want you guys to chat. So feel free to talk about whatever you want. Well, why don't we talk about your audition for the band and your first experience joining the Army band.
Oh, okay, I'll do that. It won't be short.
That's okay.
It's a most unusual audition. When the war came along, I went down to Washington and auditioned for the guy who was then conductor for Darcy, Tom Darcy. And Tom liked my playing so much that he put a thing in the file that said, "Get this man." Now, that was fine, but they had to wait for a chair to open in the band, and there was a guy named Jakubek who was due to retire. But instead of retiring, in his 60s, he and his wife gave birth to a child. So he was reluctant to retire. So that dragged along, and there was no empty chair to get in. Well, finally, my direct board was giving me a hard time. I had to do something. So I went over to the band again. Oh, well, meantime, I had gotten a job working in an aircraft assembly plant for building a bomber for the British. And the way the law read then, if you were in a war-sensitive industry, like getting airplanes in the air, you were not subject to the draft. I went down to Baltimore and got a job for the Martin Aircraft Company. So I rode from Baltimore over to Washington to find out what the hell was going on with getting a chair empty. And Darcy was in the hospital in Walter Reed. The assistant conductor was Carl Hubner, who was rank of warrant officer, and Carl went in the file and found that note that Darcy had written that said, "Get this man." And at the same time, they were just forming the ceremonial band as a funeral band. And so there were some openings in the funeral band. So Carl Hubner called in Fats Hurrell, who was heading the funeral band, getting it together, and asked if he had an opening that I might be able to get into. Well, he didn't have anything for euphonium, but he had an opening for tenor sax. Well, when I was in high school and also with the Howie Bushnell Band up in the Catskills in the summer, I had played alto and clarinet. So I said, yeah, I hadn't played a saxophone in years, but Fats got a tenor sax out of the supply room and took me into a room and looked at me, and I said, "What do you want me to play?" He said, "Play Stardust." So I played Stardust, and he said, "You're in." So I got in, actually, on tenor sax, and it wasn't until sometime later that Harold Dawkins, an Englishman, was the euphonium, and they were playing every day the National Farm and Home Hour, sponsored by Alice Chalmers on NBC. And they were about to go on the air, and Dawkins phoned in. He'd had an automobile accident and couldn't get there. And Darcy sent somebody down to tell me to come up and sit in and play the euphonium part. So I did, and I played the euphonium, and Darcy liked it well enough that from then on I was in the band on euphonium, and that's how I got in. That was probably about a year after Pearl Harbor.
He was in the band for 11 years.
Not longer, I don't think, than a year after Pearl Harbor.
How long were you in the band? How many years?
11 years.
Eddie, do you recall when you first joined the band at your basic training? You were already in the Army before you joined the band, right?
I think so.
No, USO.
USO camp shows.
You've been in like the National Guard or
Yeah.
Army Reserve for about a year or two.
Yeah.
Was out for 5 or 6 years.
Yeah,
Then,
USO camp shows.
Eddie, Freddie Wilson had something to do with you getting into the band, didn't he?
Yes,
What did Freddie? What was Freddie's role?
he was in charge of the dance band.
Okay, and how did Freddie get to know you playing?
I played somewhere with them, through the parents or whatever.
Dad, you were on a USO show in London,
Yes.
and what happened that got you from the USO show band into the United States Army band?
I can't remember specifically, but it all works out.
It was right at the time when the band was working in Teddington, England, suburb of London, and was going to leave to go to France. And it was right at that time, Eddie, that Freddie hooked up with you somewhere. I think he'd heard you playing
Yeah.
in some of the USO shows.
So he was recruited specifically to play in the band.
Specifically for the dance band. We didn't, at that time, we didn't have the term big bands. They weren't called big bands, they were called dance bands. And the band that has since become the Army Blues was then called the dance band.
Tell us about how you enlisted in the Army. And there's a department store in London. You said that you...
Right.
What was the name of the store, and how did you physically have to get in the Army?
Selfridge was the name of the store.
Okay. And your note said in September of 1944,
Right.
Your tour was with the USO, and somehow you were able to get out of that commitment with them,
Yeah.
and hook up with the Army dance band. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Where you were playing and what was going on?
Yes, but only vaguely.
Go ahead. Whatever you remember is be fine.
I had to go to a department store in London and sign some papers, and that got me into the Army. That's about all I can remember.
Well, Eddie, didn't you tell me that Darcy didn't quite trust you as a drummer at first, so he just let you play with the dance band?
Yeah, I guess partly, yeah.
And do you remember when you started playing with the concert band?
Oh, not really. Now.
Okay.
Jack, do you remember any of that?
Eddie, you remember Clyde Bowman?
Clyde Bowman?
Clyde Bowen, yes.
You remember him? Well, Eddie, when Freddie took over the dance band, he had to take some guys, even though they hadn't had any kind of a career playing that kind of music. And they had to have a drummer, and Clyde Bowman was the guy they picked. And Clyde was older than most of us, and he was from Messina up on Lake Champlain. And you replaced Clyde.
Well,
And it was a good replacement because Clyde was no jazz drummer, believe me.
well now, Jack, can I ask you here, because I know that Delancey also played dance band drums. Do you remember that at all?
Delancey played dance band drums only one time and for less than 5 minutes.
Oh, so it was just that one time?
Just one time. I can tell you the circumstance.
Please do.
Was that the one where George Raft was there?
Yes, George, we were doing a show in the Olympia Theater in Paris, and George Raft was there, and when he came out on the stage, he was going to do the first part of the show by himself. It was just a one-man thing, because he was a big Hollywood name. And so the band vacated the stage. All the guys in the band were getting off the stage, and when Raft walked out on the stage, everybody had left the stage except John Delancey. And Delancey had left his chair and was back by the drums, and Raft turned around and said, "Give me a roll." And of course what he wanted was a drum roll to introduce him. Delancey didn't know what in the hell to do, and I think Eddie had left a set of brushes on the snare drum. So Delancey picked up the brushes and began beating them on the snare drum, and Raft looked around and he growled at him. He gave him a real hard look. And he said, "You call that a roll?"
How about that? How about that? Well, Jack,
That one.
Jack, I have another question here. Do you remember when the band was told they were going overseas, what you were told? And I seem to remember that it was supposed to be kind of a secret, and what... Do you remember what you were told and who told you?
All troop movements were secret at wartime.
Okay.
All troop movements. So, of course, that was one of them. So, you weren't supposed to tell anybody that you were going overseas.
Did you even know?
Yeah, we knew. We know we were being shipped over to, but we didn't know where. And what we ended up with, we went from Washington down to a point of demarcation in Newport News, Virginia, and we ended up on what had been one of the real fancy cruise ships out in the Pacific named the Mariposa. And there was a sister ship to the Mariposa. I don't remember the name of it, I never saw it, but there were two of them that were identical. And the Mariposa, being one of those red-hot cruise ships, was fast. And because she was fast, they decided that we didn't need destroyers and so forth for protection from the German subs, because the German subs couldn't go as fast as the Mariposa. And so we had across the ocean a zigzagging course all the time to stay clear of the British submarines, I mean the German submarines. And there's a funny story I can tell you about that point of demarcation when we left Fort Myer to go down to the port to get ready to be sent over to board the ship. It was about 5 o'clock in the morning or something, and it was on a train, and we got loaded on the train. Is these stories got to be clean or what?
No.
Well, we had a father and son set in the band, and I could tell you for the rest of the day about Charlie Hershey. We got Charlie from the Roxy Theater in New York. Charlie was a bass drummer in the band, and he had a son named Carl, and Carl was also in the percussion. Eddie, you probably remember Carl Hershey, don't you?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Well, anyhow, we got on the train in the car that I was in. Carl and Dad were both in the same car, but one was at one end of the car, the front end, the other one was at the back end. And you know a bunch of musicians, and you got any kind of a situation, you're going to get some humor. And so everybody's talking, sitting on the train waiting to pull out of the station there, Natural Station. Everybody's talking about their wives and what they did the night before. And Carl, the son, said that he hadn't gotten anywhere because his wife was having her period. And Charlie stands up in the front of the car and he's giving her a har, har, har. You should have come over to my house.
Wow.
They eventually ended up with a special nickname for them. Was they were great drinkers, believe me. And they got the name of Damon and Pissy-Ass.
Yes, that's good. So when you landed in Europe, where did you guys go, and what was that whole?
See, we didn't know where the hell we were going, and that troop ship, the Mariposa, it didn't get fully converted to a troop ship as it would have been outfitted had it been built as one, and that was one unholy mess, and you had to go in this room that I guess had been the dining room when she was a civilian cruise ship, and they had long benches, and you stood at the bench and you would get a meal. They cooked 24 hours a day, but with the number of troops that they had on there, they could only serve 2 meals a day. And we had no idea where the hell we were going until we came in sight of land. And the first sight that we had of land was all these white buildings. And one of the guys, I don't remember who, sort of recognized it. And he said, Jesus Christ, that's Casablanca.
Whoa.
We're going to Morocco. So we did. And on that one, I'll tell you, on me, I grew up out in the Hamptons, out on the east end of Long Island. And out there were all the millionaire summer people, and they all wore shorts in the summer. The men wore shorts. Well, wearing shorts was a very unusual thing then. Well, when we finally landed at the piers in Casablanca, everything was British. The British were occupying all of Morocco. So it was all British Army, and the trucks that we loaded into to go out to a camp outside of Casablanca were all British trucks, British drivers, and there were no street lights or anything in the city, and so there were British guys at all the important intersections, and they're all wearing shorts. The British Army wore shorts in the summer. And I thought, God, that's pretty good. So when we got out to the camp outside of there, I took all my trousers out of the A bag and the B bag that we were carrying and cut them off, made shorts. I thought that was a great idea. We had to fall out for, what do they call it in the Army when you fall out?
Formation?
A what?
Formation?
Well, a formation, yeah. But there's one, maybe the term will come to me. But anyhow, we had to fall out for one of these things, and it's an inspection.
Ah.
And they come to me, and I'm wearing shorts. Well, the U.S. Army didn't have anybody in shorts, believe me, except me. So I caught hell for that. And the next two engagements the band played, I couldn't play, and I couldn't go because they wouldn't let me go out in shorts. I had to wait till they got some shorts some regular pants out of supply to replace the shorts. That's when Darcy began his first session of hatred of Jack Koman.
Well, so Jack, the first parade that the band did in Casablanca, you were not there?
I played that parade. Yes, that was a unbelievable, absolutely, totally unbelievable thing. You never saw so many people in your life, and they thought that band was the greatest thing that ever happened. Jeez, the reception that we got was absolutely unbelievable.
So how long were you in Africa, and then where did you go next?
Well, that's another story. Well, the city of Algiers, see, Algiers was a very important seaport on the Mediterranean, and important for the Allies. And as a result, the Germans bombed and everything you could think of. They wanted Algiers, the city, to be reduced to nothing, to rubble on the ground. And we were loaned to Eisenhower's headquarters, and Eisenhower moved his headquarters to Algiers, so we had to go to Algiers. And that was done by train crossing the Atlas Mountains in North Africa. And the band, of course, had its own supply guys and take care of setting everything up and getting everything we needed. So the supply guys, and this was a guy by the name of Bill Williams. And Bill was in charge of getting the supplies that we need on this trip across the Atlas Mountains. We had a couple of passenger cars on that railroad, and a lot of the trains in that particular group of trains that were crossing at the same time were 40 and 8s. Well, 40 and 8 was what had been a freight car and the French railroads. And see, all of North Africa at that time was pretty much French. In World War I, the 40 and 8s got the name from the fact that they carried 40 men or 8 horses. And so all our supplies and everything were in 40 and 8 cars. Bill was responsible for getting the supplies we would need for the trip across, which he did. And at the time, what you got was mostly canned food, and the canned foods came in big 1-gallon cans.
Hey, Jack.
Yeah.
Pardon the interruption here. We're just trying to manage their time. We're going to give Eddie something to drink right now. Did you want to take a break and get some water or something?
Oh, I'm well fixed.
Oh, you're amazing. I mean, this is your stamina is remarkable.
take your time.
And I do want to spend as much time as possible because Eddie's here, and it certainly helps him to hear you mention these names and events. So perhaps we can, and I'm planning on spending some more time with you in the future, but do you mind if we kind of can try to tie Eddie into some stories that...
No, quite right, but you got to leave Africa to do that.
Yes, I saw that coming, and that if you could get us there, that'd be great.
Eddie wasn't with us in Africa.
Right. Well, can you get us there and kind of give us some shared stories that the two of you had?
Get us there, meaning get back up to Europe? Or when you first met Eddie?
We'll see what we can do. Get him something to drink.
We have taken care of that.
In England, there is a suburb of London called Teddington.
Okay.
And we were quartered at Teddington on one chunk of a British Army or British Air Force station. And the way it was worked was that they had a form of truck that had been designed to transport aircraft with the wings hung back and everything, to transport aircraft over the British roads. And they assigned, I think, 3 of those things to us, and we called them the Queen Marys. And the way it worked was that we played concerts and stuff and played for the BBC for maybe 2 weeks in Teddington. And then we would go on tour for 2 weeks. And so we covered all of the British Isles, all of England, and Scotland and Wales, and those Queen Marys. And that was 2 weeks in Teddington and 2 weeks out. The 2 weeks in, we played largely for American troops and everything, because Great Britain was loaded with American troops in preparation for D-Day. And when we went on tour, we would play for any of the big troop stations that happened to be on the way, but we were playing mostly for the British public as goodwill stuff. And we had a front man that went ahead to make arrangements by the name of Bob Friendlish. But Eddie, you ought to remember Bob Friendlish, don't you?
What's that name again?
Bob Friendlish.
Do you remember Bob Friendly, Eddie?
Yes, I do, vaguely, yeah.
See, he's the guy that went ahead, like, if we were going to be traveling on a mealtime and there was an army base on the way, Bob would go ahead to make arrangements for the band to be fed.
Public affairs guy, I guess.
Okay,
Yeah. And so sometimes the rations were pretty low there, and we got the reputation of, if you told them you were a band or you were a musician or in a band, man, you were nowhere. You were nobody. So somebody came up with the idea that we're not a band. We're a mess kit repair company. And that's what we carried around the British Isles with us. But of course, eventually D-Day came, and it got to the point where Eisenhower was moving his headquarters to Europe, to France. And so that's, since we had been loaned to Eisenhower, that's when we went. And we went from London to Versailles, and we lived in Versailles for maybe 2 or 3 weeks before we moved right into the center of Paris. And you've always got to be on the lookout for what you can get. And there was a warehouse there that was full of bicycle parts. A lot of the guys assembled bicycles, and we had gotten very used to bicycles. We almost all had bicycles in England. We had gotten very used to them, so a lot of the guys raided the warehouse of bicycle parts and made bicycles. But then they moved us out of there, and when we moved into town in Paris, there was nothing doing for bicycles. That was the end of that.
All right, and so Eddie joined the band when you were in London?
I believe that Freddie Woolston picked Eddie up just before we went to Versailles. It may have been after, but I'm thinking it was just before. Because one thing I remember, and I can't tell you that this is fact now. This is just supposition on my part. But after the war, when you got out of the service, they had a thing that the government would pay for your transportation to where you had joined the army. So wherever you had joined, when you got your discharge, that's where they sent you. Or they paid the expenses to go there. Well, Eddie had, I'm reasonably sure that Eddie had joined in London. So when he got out of the band, that meant he had a free ride to London. And I believe he took it and went and spent some time in England back after he got out of the band.
Yeah.
Does that ring a bell to you, Eddie?
Yeah.
Do you remember that, Eddie? Or do you want to talk to him about that?
Yes, I remember getting out of the van over there.
Dad, remember, tell us about General Eisenhower flew the band back, which was unusual.
Yeah.
And you were then back at Fort Myer, but because what Jack was saying, because the band had a policy of returning you to the place of enlistment.
Yeah.
The Army had the policy.
The Army had the policy. So you took advantage of that.
Yeah.
And can you just tell us a little bit about, you were still in the Army and you got basically a furlough to go back to England, and when you went back to England, what did you do?
Not a furlough. I think he was discharged.
Well, here's the thing. I'm trying to get at. There was kind of a catch-22. I want Dad to tell us about the discharge, but when you got your notes that I read said when you got to England, then you asked for a furlough.
Yeah.
During that, and they granted that. What did you do during your free time on your free trip back to England?
Oh no, it's up too foggy now.
Okay.
Probably went up to his relative in Birmingham.
Okay, so you got to see relatives, and then did you also go to Scotland to see Scotty and other people that you met during the war?
I think so. It's too vague now.
Okay, but then you tried to get discharged in England, and what did you find out?
It couldn't be done.
Okay. You couldn't be discharged on foreign soil, right?
I guess so.
So then what happened?
The story better take a breather. I'm not sure anymore.
Okay. But you had to go back to America to get discharged. So
I got Fort Dix.
Fort Dix. How'd you get to Fort Dix from England?
A troop ship.
Okay. With a bunch of troops coming back from the war?
Right.
Do you remember anything about that?
Too foggy now.
Okay.
A big troop ship. Southampton, I think.
Southampton. Okay. So you got a free trip to England on the Army.
Right.
Okay.
I'm running out of steam.
All right. Okay, buddy.
Well, I had struck up a correspondence correspondence back and forth with Aldous Huxley.
The
Does that
philosopher,
mean- tell you anything?
Aldous Huxley, the
Yes.
Well, Aldous had invited me, and I was, when we came back, of course, I was not yet married. And Aldous had invited me to come out and visit at his place out in the desert called Llano. And so I bought a travel trailer, and a couple of lawyers in Washington had a 1940, I guess it was, 12-cylinder Pierce Arrow limousine, 7-passenger limousine, monster engine. And I figured that would be good for towing the trailer. And they had taken it off the blocks. It had been on blocks in the garage all during the war. They got it off the blocks, we got it running, and I bought it. And there's a hell of a story with the band that goes with that, too. But I never did make the trip. When I wanted to get out, there was a thing called the Truman Year. Did you ever hear of that?
No, sir.
Well, Harry Truman was president, and you couldn't have 10 million guys all getting turned out of the military and dropped in the public at one time. It was overrunning all the facilities that the country had. So Harry Truman had to put in a thing whereby after you put in papers for your discharge, you couldn't get the discharge immediately. Your papers would be held on file, but you were going to be held for at least another year, and maybe more. So when I put in for a discharge, I got hit with the Truman Year, and most of the guys that wanted discharges had gotten it in before that. Tony Miranda, John Delancey, Henry Hot Lips Levine, and a lot of the other guys that had been in the business before the war got out. But I was just too late when I put my papers in, so I got struck by the Truman Year, and I couldn't get out. Well, first we did a tour of the eastern United States selling war bonds. And then I ended up getting married. And by that time, we sort of talked it over and decided that staying in the band wasn't a bad way to go, and I would stay. So I stayed then until I had a total of 11 years.
Hey Jack, this is Bill. Was that on that special train? It was like designed with an Army mess kitchen and a Pullman car for you guys to sleep on, and the instruments and uniforms when you went on that.
The bonds.
The bond tour.
Bonds?
That was done by train mostly, and seems to me some of it was bus, but I remember the train mostly.
Dad, you were on that train as well. Do you remember the bond tour?
I remember the bond tour, yeah.
Do I remember what?
That tour that you did. I was asking Dad if he remembers the bond tour by special Pullman car. You know, it's sort of designed for the Army band, several cars, so that you traveled on that train for several months doing a.
I don't know anything about there being special design. They were just plain Pullmans.
Oh, okay.
All right, well, Jack, listen, we're going to sign off for now and give Eddie a break, and then we're going to reschedule sometime in the future if, in fact, I don't come down myself to meet you and spend some time with you.
Okay.
And I want to thank you so much, sir, thank you so much for your patience and helping us get this thing together this morning.
Well, I'm sorry it takes so damn long to tell one of these tales, but I don't know how to tell it any shorter.
You know what? It's so much better. You're a great storyteller. You're everything I could have ever hoped for in an interview like this, so thank you.
To whatever you got, you're welcome.
Thank you so much. We'll be in touch soon. Ann, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, bye, Eddie. Bye, Eddie. Bye, Bill.
Eddie,
Yes,
take care of yourself.
okay.
I love you, you know that.
Yes, I do. Bill, you take your.
Wave bye. Say wave bye. Okay.
Goodbye, Eddie.
Okay.
All right.
All right, I'm hanging up now.
Okay, thanks.
Bye-bye.